Listen closely, or you might not hear the first notes. It's little more than a whisper, but in a few moments, this sound is going to culminate into one of the grandest statements of all of piano repertoire.
The first note is so low in the contrabassoon that it's almost like some kind of serpent that lives at the bottom of the ocean and it's starting to come up.
This ambiguous opening is how Maurice Ravel begins one of his darkest and most ambitious works.
It's murky and dark, and it's like, what is this? What is this texture that he's going for?
The year is 1929. Ravel had just returned from a triumphant and highly successful tour of the United States, where he was filled with the infectious energy of jazz and new ideas.
One of the highlights of his trip was meeting George Gershwin in New York, and George was just lavish in his praise of Ravel and wanted Ravel to teach him, and Ravel refused because he said, with your talent and your instincts, there's no need for my instruction. You'd only end up writing bad Ravel.
But upon returning to Europe, Ravel had to confront a darker reality, the enduring shadow of World War I, which had completely altered European life and which was continuing to influence Ravel and his music and the world around him. Ravel's world was torn between the excitement of new beginnings and new inspiration and the haunting memory of war. And in the midst of all this, Ravel received a rather unusual commission. Ravel was tasked with writing a concerto, but only for the left hand, for Paul Wittgenstein, a pianist who had lost his right arm in the war. It was certainly a challenge, but one that Ravel was eager to take on, to push the limits of what could be possible with just one hand. Little did he know that this would be one of his last major works. And unfortunately, things did not go so smoothly.
I don't understand. Is it modern?
Although Wittgenstein was a capable performer and has contributed a lot to the history of piano repertoire, he struggled a lot with this piece, both the technical demands and the emotional complexity. He even went so far as to make deliberate changes to the score, something which absolutely infuriated Ravel, who believed that every marking was extremely precise and needed to be respected by the performer. It was clear that this concerto needed a different kind of pianist, one that could tackle its technical and emotional challenges with grit and determination. Thankfully, years after Wittgenstein's debut, such a pianist would take on this piece, transforming it and bringing out a raw emotional power that had been laying dormant, waiting to be expressed. Since then, many incredible pianists have performed this piece, but this recording is still in many ways the definitive interpretation. But let's get back to that in a moment. In order to understand what makes the left-hand concerto so unique, we need to start by comparing it to another Ravel masterpiece. I'm joined today by Gwendolyn Mok, an expert on Ravel who has recorded almost all of his works. Mok has some fabulous lessons on Debussy and Ravel over on Tonebase Premium, which is the platform that makes videos like this possible. Be sure to check the link in the description below to get started with a 14-day free trial. And be sure to take your left or right hand and click like and subscribe on this video. Without further ado, let's get back into it. It's pretty wild to imagine that Ravel's left-hand concerto was written at about the same time as his concerto for two hands, the G major. Remember that nearly inaudible opening we heard earlier? Well, let's compare that to the opening of the G major concerto.
Trying to lead you down the path of righteousness. I'm gonna lead you down the path that rocks.
I always laugh because I'm listening to the left-hand concerto and I'm like turning up the volume. Because in the beginning, you can't even hear the first note.
This is probably one of the reasons that Wittgenstein struggled so much with the left-hand concerto. It probably just wasn't what he was expecting. This level of darkness and intensity had not really existed in Ravel's music to this point. Of course, none of Ravel's music is easy, and he had gotten quite close to this darkness in previous works. But the left-hand concerto is something quite different.
The left-hand concerto really mimics more of the classic concertos of the times. When you think of Brahms' concerto, one of the interesting things Ravel said was those concertos are designed not for the piano, but against the piano. Whereas the divertissement is so much more like a chamber piece, and it's written for reduced orchestra. So it's a different animal altogether.
Not only that, but the technical demands and the inventiveness of the left-hand writing far exceed any of the other Wittgenstein piano commissions. Ravel treats the left hand like an entire orchestra. He doesn't think of Wittgenstein's disability like a limitation, but rather an opportunity for innovation. There are many places in the left-hand concerto where the writing is even more virtuosic and more lush than any place in the G major two-handed concerto.
Ravel Piano Concerto for the left hand is metal.
It almost is kind of like a Brahmsian quality. There's something really thick about it. The pianist is almost fighting against himself or herself as they're playing. It's like a struggle to play that cadenza. And in Brahms, and if you think about Brahms as well, you know, the opening of either of the two concerti, it's like titanic what you have to do.
I would say the only composer that comes even close to matching Ravel's ambition was Strauss, interestingly enough. Even then, Wittgenstein reportedly disliked Strauss's first attempt and demanded a rewrite, which I think says a lot about his perfectionism and stubbornness as a performer. It would take years for a pianist to finally come along and play this piece the way that it should have been played. It makes sense that Ravel's left-hand concerto would resonate with a pianist like Samson François. The way that François plays the opening of this piece honestly changed my life when I heard it. Born in 1924, Samson François' personal life was just as chaotic and as wild as his playing. He was known for his rebellious spirit, and he often clashed with his teacher at the Paris Conservatoire, Marguerite Long, who found his behavior rather impossible to control. It's rumored that he was the only student that she ever struck, and he wore this like a badge of honor.
Do bundle up, it's awfully cold outside.
He had that dark quality in his life. He lived on the edge. He was an excessive drinker and alcoholic. His life was cut short because he was so abusive, you know, he never took care of himself.
That rebellious spirit appeared in his playing. It was unpredictable, wild, even reckless at times, but always deeply felt and deeply musical. François' playing is full of power, but it's not just raw intensity. It's often a really intricate interplay between pedaling, touch, and timing. His rhythmic idiosyncrasies in particular really set him apart. For example, in his performance of Alborada del Gracioso, or in Tombeau de Couperin.
That daringness and that sort of living on the edge came through in his performance of this left-hand concerto, which makes it so arresting.
It's explosive, it's direct, it's technically brilliant, and yet it's so full of deep, dark, wide emotion.
I almost feel like you have to have a possessed or a demonic quality in you as a person to play that opening really convincingly, because it is like a struggle. It's like Samson, is trying to struggle against something.
François' improvisatory approach to this material really highlights the way that it was inspired by Ravel's time in the United States and by his hearing of lots of jazz. For example, he plays this characteristic theme just a little bit differently every single time. François' performance of the final cadenza in this piece shows just how much he's thinking about the larger lines and the larger structure. François builds this tension really gradually and so intentionally, as though the music is always on the edge of falling apart, although it never really does.
And this is something that my teacher, Lotte Perlmutter, really hammered away at me, was that it's really important not to play Ravel's music with any sense of sentimentality. Deliver the goods with a little more of an objective kind of approach. That's how François delivered the left-hand concerto, for me at least. And he was playful and mischievous and all of that, but he was not sentimental in any way.
It's this combination of precision and wildness that makes François' playing just so incredibly compelling. So what can we, as pianists and piano students, learn from François' performance of the Ravel left-hand concerto?
In terms of my approach to teaching, my approach to performing Ravel, there's a little distance between myself and the feelings that I have of the piece. It's not that I'm playing it without feelings at all, but I try not to allow myself to go into those sentimental places. It gives the audience and the listener an opportunity to sort of listen without being persuaded. The pedaling has to be exquisite. You can't just slap that pedal down. So your technique has to be really pristine. Ravel is not an easy composer to teach or to start on your own if you're learning by yourself. Rest assured, if you start from those smaller works, then you can graduate up.
Ravel's left-hand concerto and Samson François are so deeply intertwined. Like François' life, the piece feels tragically short, but marked with such power and intensity. In this recording, there's such a sense of darkness and determination. In Ravel's music, in François' performance, in the sound of the orchestra, as though they are all giving everything that they have to this music. And I think the piece demands no less than that. It's also important to remember that this was one of Ravel's last major works. He suffered a serious head injury in 1932, which led to gradually deteriorating neurological symptoms, which severely hindered his ability to write or even to communicate, and he ultimately died in 1937. Hearing this piece makes me wonder what Ravel might have written if he had lived for another 10 years, and yet that kind of unrealized promise is what makes this piece so incredibly magical and so powerful to begin with. This is a work born of the shadow of war, of the inspiration of new ideas. It stands as one of the most singular and interesting pieces that Ravel ever wrote. This is the final statement from a brilliant mind that will forever be immortalized in the score, in Samson François' incredible recording, and in the performances of incredible pianists who are playing it in the present day. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is one of my personal favorite stories and personal favorite recordings, so it was really fun to share it with all of you today. What is your favorite Samson François recording? Or what is, if it's not François, your favorite performance of the Ravel left-hand concerto? Because there are a lot of really good ones to choose from. And don't forget to check out Tonebase Premium, where Gwendolyn Mok has some fabulous, fabulous courses on Ravel, and we'll have some new ones coming up in the new year. Be sure to also check out Gwendolyn Mok's fantastic video that's already here on YouTube, discussing the subtle differences between the compositional and pianistic styles of Debussy and Ravel. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm Robert Fleitz from Tonebase, and I'll see you next time.